What you are about to see is not just an administrative crisis. It is the controlled demolition of decades of Jehovah's Witness influence in one of the most important countries in Europe. In 2025, and now into 2026, direct orders have been coming out of Warwick headquarters and landing on the desks of congregation elders across France. Kingdom halls that brothers and sisters spent years building, cleaning, maintaining, and paying for with their own money are going to the auction block. Historic properties in prime urban locations, sold off at a pace that has left many rank-and-file members confused, and in some cases, quietly devastated. By the time this video ends, you will understand exactly why this is happening. You will see the financial pressure the French government has placed on the organization, the staggering numbers behind Europe's membership collapse, the specific strategy Warwick is using to extract as much money as possible before the walls close in, and what this entire episode reveals about how the governing body really thinks about the brothers and sisters it claims to shepherd. This is the kind of story the organization's own publications will never tell you. If you are new here, this channel exists to follow the evidence wherever it leads, even when it leads somewhere the governing body would prefer you never look. Subscribe now, because what is happening in France is not a local story. It is a preview of what is coming across all of Western Europe, and you are going to want to follow this as it unfolds. Let's begin. To understand what is happening in France right now, you need to understand what France has always represented for the Watchtower organization. France is not a small market. It is the country with the largest Jehovah's Witness population in Western Europe, with an estimated 120,000 to 130,000 active publishers at its peak. The organization built its French infrastructure over many decades: assembly halls, branch offices, hundreds of kingdom halls in cities, suburbs, and rural towns. This was not cheap real estate. Much of it sits in locations that have appreciated enormously in value over the years: Paris, Lyon, Marseille, Bordeaux. These are not minor cities. For most of its history in France, the organization benefited from a legal framework that granted recognized religious associations a significant set of privileges. Chief among them was tax exemption status. Under French law, recognized religious associations do not pay taxes on donations received from members. They do not pay taxes on inheritances and legacies left to the organization by deceased members. And in a country where legacy giving has historically been one of the Watchtower Society's most lucrative revenue streams, that exemption has been worth an extraordinary amount of money. That legal protection, however, began to crack. In 2025, the French government moved to place serious pressure on the organization's associative legal status. French authorities, drawing in part on years of documented complaints from former members, from human rights organizations, and from the organization's own track record in European courts regarding shunning and child protection failures, signaled that the automatic renewal of Watchtower's religious recognition could no longer be taken for granted. For an organization that had already lost a major legal battle in France in the early 2000s over a tax dispute that cost it tens of millions of euros, this was not a theoretical threat. It was an institutional memory. They had been here before, and it had been extraordinarily painful. What happens if the Watchtower organization in France loses its recognized religious status? The answer, in purely financial terms, is catastrophic for Warwick. Under French law, donations and inheritances received by an unrecognized association can be taxed at rates that climb as high as 60%. 60%. If a loyal Jehovah's Witness in Lyon leaves the organization 200,000 euros in their will, and the organization no longer holds legal religious recognition at the time of that inheritance, the French government could legally claim up to 120,000 of those euros in taxes. The math is brutal, and Warwick's financial team understands the math. This is the context that makes everything else legible. The governing body is not selling kingdom halls in France because the organization is modernizing, or because they have found more efficient ways to hold meetings. They are liquidating because they are afraid. Specifically, they are afraid that assets currently sitting on French soil, in a legal environment that is turning hostile, could soon be subject to taxation or restriction in ways that Warwick cannot control from New York. The solution, the only solution that makes financial sense from their perspective, is to convert those physical assets into cash, move that cash through the Watchtower's internal financial architecture, and get it out of France before the regulatory environment becomes even less favorable. This is not spiritual discernment. This is risk management. And understanding that distinction is essential to understanding what kind of organization the governing body is actually running. Now let's talk about what the numbers look like. because the financial pressure from the French government is only half of the story. The other half is demographic, and in some ways it is even more damning. Every year, the Watchtower organization publishes what it calls its service report, a global accounting of active publishers, baptisms, and hours of preaching activity. These numbers are presented in the organization's own materials as evidence of Jehovah's blessing, a kind of spiritual scoreboard. But if you actually read those numbers carefully and compare them across regions, a picture emerges that the governing body would very much prefer its members not to examine. In sub-Saharan Africa, the organization continues to grow at a meaningful pace. Baptism rates in some African countries reach 10% of the active publisher base in a given year. That is genuine expansion, new people coming in faster than older members die or leave. In parts of Latin America, the numbers are similarly encouraging for the organization. These regions are the places where Watchtower genuinely has momentum. Europe tells a completely different story. According to data from the 2025 service report, the baptism rate across Western Europe sits at approximately 1.7% of active publishers per year. That number sounds small, but its implications are devastating when you think about it properly. In a given congregation of 100 publishers, that rate means roughly 1 to 2 people are baptized in an entire year. Meanwhile, the average age of active Jehovah's Witnesses in Western Europe is rising consistently. Members are dying. Members are quietly fading. Members are being disfellowshipped. And 1.7% annual baptisms does not come close to replacing the losses on the other end of that equation. What this means in practice is that the Watchtower organization in France and in Western Europe broadly is in demographic decline. The publisher count has stagnated. The number of hours reported in field service has fallen. Meeting attendance in the kingdom halls that have not yet been sold is, by multiple accounts from current and former members in France, a fraction of what it was 10 or 15 years ago. You have buildings sized for congregations that no longer exist at that scale. You have organizational infrastructure designed for a movement that was growing, now deployed for a movement that is shrinking. From a purely institutional standpoint, the decision to consolidate, merge congregations, and sell off underutilized properties is not irrational. Organizations facing demographic contraction make these kinds of structural adjustments. What makes this story something other than a routine institutional restructuring is the way the governing body has handled the human dimension of it, the way information has been managed, and who ultimately benefits from the transactions. Here is how the process has actually worked on the ground in France. And this is where the picture becomes particularly revealing. The Watchtower organization in France, like in every other country, operates through a network of local congregation accounts. Members contribute financially to their local congregation, and those local congregations contribute upward to the national branch. For years, the organization encouraged brothers and sisters to invest in their kingdom halls, to contribute to renovation funds, to donate their time and labor building and maintaining these properties. The emotional attachment many members have to their local kingdom hall is real and deep. These are places where they were baptized, where their children grew up, where they sat with fellow believers for decades. When the order comes from Warwick, transmitted through the French branch, to sell a particular kingdom hall, the congregation that has been meeting there does not receive the proceeds. The money does not go back to the brothers and sisters whose donations built and maintained the building. It flows upward, through the organization's financial structure, to accounts controlled by Watchtower headquarters. In many cases, the congregation is then told it will need to travel farther to a different, often rented, facility. The kingdom hall they built is gone. The money they contributed to build it is gone. And they are now expected to continue donating to an organization that has just liquidated their community's most tangible asset. This is not an accident or an oversight in the organization's financial design. It is the design. Congregation-level properties in the Jehovah's Witness organizational structure are not owned by the local congregation in any meaningful legal sense. They are held by legal entities controlled by Watchtower, and Watchtower can dispose of them as it sees fit. Brothers and sisters who believed they were building something for their community discover, when the letter arrives, that they were building an asset for the corporation. Meanwhile, in 2025, the French branch was simultaneously running what can only be described as a public relations and lobbying campaign, using its own members as participants. Congregations across France were encouraged, through talks and materials from the branch, to write personal letters to French government officials and politicians, advocating for the preservation of the organization's religious recognition. Members were presented with this as a matter of religious freedom, a fight for the right to worship. And for many of them, in good conscience, it genuinely felt that way. What the members writing those letters were not told was that while they were addressing envelopes and describing their personal faith journeys to government officials, the organization was already executing a strategy to remove assets from French soil as efficiently as possible. The same branch directing them to petition the government for protection was simultaneously coordinating the sale of properties that government recognition had helped protect and build over decades. The members were being deployed as a human shield for a financial withdrawal operation they were not permitted to see clearly. If that framing seems harsh, consider it from the perspective of an elder in a congregation near Paris who spent 20 years as a volunteer on construction projects, who helped pour concrete and hang drywall and donate weekends because he believed he was building something for his brotherhood and for Jehovah. Now his Kingdom Hall is listed with a real estate agency. The proceeds are going to Warwick, and he is being asked to drive 40 minutes to a rented hall while writing letters asking the government to respect his religious community. He is participating in his own dispossession without being given the information he would need to understand what is actually happening. There is a phrase the governing body uses frequently. You have heard it if you have spent any time around Jehovah's Witness materials. The phrase is, "The end is very near." Armageddon is just around the corner. The destruction of this wicked system of things is imminent. This has been the organizational posture, with varying degrees of urgency and specific chronological claims, for the entire history of the Watchtower movement. The 1914 generation, the 1975 prediction. The overlapping generations doctrine, which has been revised and re-revised to extend the prophetic timeline as needed. Members in France and across Western Europe have been told their entire lives that they should not invest too heavily in this world. That higher education is a distraction, that career ambitions are spiritually dangerous, that the important thing is to pioneer, to serve, to give to the organization, because the end is coming and none of the things of this world will matter. And then the organization that told them this began calling real estate agents. The cognitive dissonance here is not subtle. If the kingdom of God is genuinely imminent, if Armageddon is as close as Watchtower publications have consistently implied, then the frantic conversion of French kingdom halls into liquid financial assets makes no theological sense whatsoever. You do not liquidate your real estate portfolio in a country where you operate if you genuinely believe that country's government, along with all human governments, will be swept away by divine intervention within the next few years. You do not move money offshore, restructure legal entities, and consolidate regional assets if your eschatological timeline is as compressed as the governing body's rhetoric suggests. But if you are an institution concerned first and foremost with its own financial survival, if you are an organization whose primary loyalty is to the preservation of its own assets and influence, then everything happening in France makes perfect sense. You sell when you can still sell for a good price. You get the money out before the regulatory environment gets worse. You consolidate your losses in a declining market and redirect capital to regions where the demographic trends are more favorable. You protect the institution. The end is not near for the governing body, not in the way they preach it. For them, the end that actually motivates behavior is the end of favorable tax treatment in France, the end of a growing publisher base in Western Europe, the end of the social and institutional conditions that allowed the organization to accumulate the wealth it is now so urgently trying to protect. And the brothers and sisters in France who built those kingdom halls, who wrote those letters, who drove past their sold congregation buildings with a knot in their stomach that the organization gave them no language to properly name. They deserve to know what the data actually shows, what the financial decisions actually reveal, and what the institution they have given so much of their lives to actually prioritizes when it believes no one who matters is watching. This is the story that the organization's official communications will never tell. It will not appear in the next issue of the Watchtower. It will not be addressed in a regional convention. It will not be acknowledged from any Kingdom Hall podium in France. But it is documented in real estate transactions, in public records, in the organization's own financial reports, and in the lived experience of thousands of members who are quietly trying to make sense of what they are watching happen around them. If you are watching this and you live in France, if you have been part of a congregation that was told its Kingdom Hall was being sold, if you have seen the attendance numbers in your own congregation and felt something that the organization called a lack of faith when it was actually just an accurate perception of reality, I want you to know, what you sensed is real. The numbers confirm it. The financial decisions confirm it. Leave a comment below. Tell us what you have seen. If you know of a Kingdom Hall that has closed recently, in France or anywhere else in Europe, share it. Your testimony is part of the historical record that the organization works very hard to suppress. Subscribe to this channel if you are not subscribed yet. What is happening in France is not the end of a local story. It is the opening chapter of a much larger reckoning across Western Europe, and this channel will be here to cover every development as it unfolds. The governing body preaches that the end is near. Watch what they do with their money, and you will know what they actually believe.